Retirement planning gets broken down into something like 30 different decisions: Social Security, taxes, investments, healthcare, estate stuff, when and how much to withdraw. It's a lot. I've sat across the table from hundreds of families working through exactly this. And here's what I noticed. Almost nobody actually needs to solve all 30 problems. It really boils down to just 3 questions. And once those 3 questions click, every decision on that list starts answering itself. So let's spend the next 8 minutes doing that. First, the way most people think about retirement and why it's setting them up to be anxious, no matter how much they've saved. Then, the model that actually works. I'm Daniel Miller, and I help families steward their wealth with purpose and generosity. If you like content like this video and subscribe for more. Most people are carrying around an imaginary number, $1 million, maybe 2, and whatever it is, they check their investment account constantly to make sure they're on track. They log in, look at the balance, and they feel something about it. If it's up, they feel good. If it's down, it's a rough day. And the question underneath it all is always the same. Is this enough? So here's the issue. A balance by itself doesn't tell you if retirement works. Because $1 million funds a great 30-year retirement for one family and runs out in 12 years for the next one. It's the same number, but it's 2 wildly different outcomes depending entirely on what's behind it. The spending, the income sources, and how the money is structured. These are illustrations and not predictions for anyone specific. But the number on your statement isn't a plan. It's material. What matters most is how it's organized. So think about how this works right now while you're still working. You've got one income, a paycheck, and it shows up, it covers your life, and you don't think twice about it. But when you retire, that paycheck stops. But your mortgage might not, and groceries certainly don't. Life doesn't pause just because you retired. So the real question was never how big is the pile of savings, it's really where does that income come from once I retire? And that's the whole shift. Every dollar that you've saved has one of 3 jobs. And once you see it that way, this stuff gets a lot less complicated. So layer 1 is the floor. The floor is your guaranteed income. It shows up every month regardless of what the market's doing. Social Security is the obvious part of this, but a pension if you have one, and maybe an annuity if that's part of your plan. It doesn't matter what happens to the markets, this money will show up. The question here is, does my guaranteed income cover my minimum life expenses? Not the dream retirement, just the non-negotiables. Housing, food, utilities, insurance. So say your Social Security comes to $2,400 a month, and your basic living expenses run $3,200 a month. There's an $800 gap, and something else has to cover it every single month. But say you flip it, and Social Security is $3,000, but your basics are $2,800. Then the floor, your guaranteed income, handles everything on its own. So 2 people with similar net worth might have completely different stress levels based on their expenses and their floors. Now everyone's benefit looks different, and future Social Security is subject to your earnings history and current law, so treat these as examples and not predictions. But here's why this matters more than people give it credit for. When the basics are locked in by income that can't disappear, a bad market year is annoying, but it's not dangerous. You can ride it out because your expenses aren't depending on your portfolio's earnings that month. When your basics do depend on the portfolio, every dip feels like your survival is on the line. And that's usually when people panic sell and turn a temporary problem into a permanent one. The floor is what keeps this from happening. And the second layer is the engine. The floor keeps you alive, but nobody works 30 years just to stay alive and pay bills. You want the retirement that you actually pictured. And that's financed by your engine. Everything that the floor doesn't need to cover. Your travel, your hobbies, helping the kids out, the stuff that makes retirement worth having. That's what comes out of the portfolio, whether it's a 401k, an IRA, a Roth, a brokerage, whatever you've built. So the question becomes, how much do you need to pull each year, and will it hold up for 25 or 30 years? A quick example is imagine your total spending is $6,000 a month, and your floor covers $2,400 of it. That means the engine needs to produce $3,600 a month, which is about $43,000 a year. Now on a $750,000 portfolio, That's roughly a 5.8% withdrawal rate. On a $1.2 million portfolio, the same dollar amount is closer to a 3.6% withdrawal rate. So it's the same lifestyle, but a completely different level of pressure on your wealth. And again, these are hypothetical numbers and actual results depend on markets, which nobody controls. But most people treat their portfolio like one big undifferentiated pile. That's a big mistake. The engine works a lot better when it's split by timeline. The money you'll need in a couple years sitting somewhere stable, and the money you won't touch for a decade is allowed to actually grow. If you do that, and a bad year doesn't force you to sell your growth positions at the worst possible time. You're spending from the stable bucket while your growth bucket recovers on its own. Most people never hear this. They just watch one number bounce around and assume when it drops that something's broken. But usually it's not broken. It was just never built with any structure. Now, if you're already doing the math on your own floor and engine while you watch this, that's a good sign. And it's actually the conversation my team has with people every single week. There's a link below if you want a second set of eyes on it. There's no pitch or pressure, just a real look at where you're at and where you're headed. Layer number 3 is the buffer. This is your cash, your stable reserves, insurance, and its whole job is absorbing whatever life throws at you so the other 2 layers don't get touched. Year 1 of retirement, things can happen. A medical bill hits, a roof leaks, a transmission blows, helping a family member out of a jam, or the market drops 20% right after your last paycheck ever hits. Now, without a buffer, every one of those forces you to pull extra from your portfolio. And if the market happens to be down that month, you're selling at a loss to pay for an emergency. I watched this happen with a couple I worked with. They were in their mid-50s, good savers, had a solid portfolio, but they had no cash set aside anywhere. 6 months into retirement, the transmission went out in their vehicle the same month that the market dropped 12%. So a $7,000 repair, and the only place to get it was from selling assets in that dip. The repair wasn't the problem. Having nowhere else to pull from was the problem. But I also see this go the other direction. Some people have zero buffer because every dollar is invested, and others go too far the other way, sitting on $200,000 or $300,000 in a savings account, earning nothing while inflation grows. The right amount is specific to you, but generally somewhere around 12 to 24 months of the gap between your floor income and your total spending, plus anything that you know is already planned. Nobody gets excited talking about their cash reserve, but it's the layer that keeps the other 2 from breaking the first time something goes sideways. And something always goes sideways eventually. Now, why this actually matters. The floor, the engine, the buffer. Here's what happens once all that's in your head. Deciding when to take Social Security, that's really a floor decision. If you wait longer, the floor gets bigger. But if you take it early, the engine has to pick up the slack. Figuring out how aggressive to invest, that's an engine decision. Building an emergency plan, that's a buffer decision. Plain and simple. And some of these blend together. Helping your adult kids financially feels like an emotional decision, but it's really a buffer question, wearing a disguise, because if you pull from the buffer and the engine's untouched, but if you pull from the engine, you've just permanently cut your own future income to help theirs. Thinking about a second home or some big purchase, that one's engine and buffer together. Can the engine still hold up after it? And does the buffer cover the ongoing cost without getting wiped out? Every one of those used to feel like its own separate headache, but it isn't. It's the same 3 questions on repeat. Does the floor cover the basics? Can the engine sustain the lifestyle? And is the buffer strong enough to protect the other 2? Get comfortable answering those, and there isn't much retirement can throw at you that you can't work through. Now, knowing the 3 layers is one thing. The mistakes that actually show up depend a lot on where you sit. What goes wrong at $500,000 isn't what goes wrong at $3 million. I put together a video on the 7 levels of retirement wealth in America, starting at $250,000 and all the way up to $10 million. And the one mistake that quietly costs people the most at each level. If you want to find yours, that's the next video. I'll see you there.